Well, hello, ladies. It's Nancy Cordes, Chief White House Correspondent for CBS News. So delighted to see some of my very favorite people on the second anniversary of the release of what was a really special book to me, Rebalance: How Women Lead, Parent, Partner, and Thrive. And I'm here with the three thriving authors themselves, Lisa Newberger Fernandez, Wendy Jagerson Teleki, and Monica Brand Engel, joining me from various points on the globe, but we thought it was important to come back together and talk about some of your insights 2 years on, how you're feeling about them, how your lives have changed, how people have responded to the book. So thanks so much for joining me for this chat.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, Nancy. Great to be here.
It's great to be with you guys. So let's start out just talking about how the book was received. It was read by hundreds of people. I'm sure you've gotten lots of feedback. What have they told you really resonated most for them? And Monica, maybe I'll start with you.
Thanks, Nancy. The feedback I received has been so heartening because it actually was sort of people who were maybe 1 or 2 degrees removed who heard about the book, heard about it from other people. And ironically, I think the biggest piece of feedback has to do with community, what we call the wolf pack in the book. And it's actually our opening quote from Maya Angelou, where we say, "I come as one, but I stand as 10,000." And the realization that our journeys are not singular. They really are very connected to other women's journeys who have struggled with the same things we've struggled, who actually have overcome and persevered and just fallen down and gotten up again. So that notion of really finding your wolf pack, finding that group of people who can, for us, systematically be there to help give you advice, to help encourage you on, and also to help call you when you're going off track. So I think for me, that's been the most heartening, that they've really been mobilized to form their own groups similar to Thrive.
Wendy, how about you? How did your wolf pack respond?
Yeah, I had a similar experience. Over the last couple of years, from time to time, I'll get an email or I'll run into somebody in my travels who will say they've read the book. It always, takes me back. And I would say by and large, these are women who are earlier in their careers with young children, and they're really trying to grapple with, how do I make this all work? How do I balance all these different things? And I think what they've appreciated about the book is that message of being able to lean in or lean out, really designing your life in a way that makes sense to you, not trying to go through just kind of the steady path that is set, people feel is set for them ahead of time, that they really have agency to kind of define how they want to show up, every day with their work, and that they can make choices that are going to be the right choices for their family and the right choices for their work, without having to really make, dramatic decisions to forego working or, not have kids, that it's all manageable. So that's been really exciting to see them excited and saying it really helped them as they've had to grapple with some of these issues early in their careers and family lives.
Lisa, you really chose to put your money where your mouth is and thrive on an entirely different continent. So give us a little bit of insight into that decision and how you've brought some of the principles from the book to Spain, where you live now.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, so we've recently moved to Madrid, as you mentioned, and as a result, I've started to meet a lot of new women. And what's been really fun for me is that before meeting some people for the first time, they'll tell me, "Oh, I just read your book. I looked you up, and I'm loving this." I actually started a Thrive Madrid chapter when I moved here, and that is going strong. And it's been really fun to see what messages translate across the Atlantic. And it's interesting things, different than what I might have expected. One thing that I've noticed is that working moms and working women in Spain tell me that the hardest thing for them about their wheel is me time. And I noticed that in the US, I feel like that's more common thing that's like on the top of the list of at least the women in Thrive DC when we were going strong. And so that's one insight that I've noticed. Community here in Spain is really important. Your family kind of is first, right at the top of the list. And as a result, sometimes your own time for yourself is kind of lower down. Super interesting.
That is really interesting and a little bit counterintuitive because we've always sort of been led to believe that Europeans are better when it comes to balance than we Americans are. Have you found that it's a little more nuanced than the stereotype?
I would say it is nuanced. It is true, and I feel it every day living here in Spain, that the quality of life is so high here. Just like your average lunch or dinner, walking around in the streets, like seeing the and sort of the what you get for your money here, just with a really casual meal is always going to be like very high. And but what I've learned from other working moms is that because of all the demands on your time, it's like you tend to be the last person that you're thinking about, like your own health, your own exercise, your own classes, like, you know, going to the gym or doing a meditation. These are things that I found to be really common for women and friends when I lived in the Bay Area and in DC. So you may, I would say that still women and working women in Spain have a very high quality of life, but they're just not necessarily always prioritizing to do that one thing for yourself. And one thing in the book that I always come back to is this metaphor of taking the steering wheel of your life, of your career. And a way to think about it is when you get on the airplane, it's, you know, put the mask on yourself first before you worry about anybody sitting next to you. Because if you fall apart, you're just going to be a burden on everybody else on an airplane or in your life. And so that turns out to be one of the messages that I think has really attracted some of the women into Thrive Madrid, is this like permission to thrive, the permission to, you know, take time out for yourself, meet some friends for lunch, you know, do something for yourself first.
You know, you all wrote this book drawing upon your life experiences, your work experiences from your 20s and your 30s and your 40s. And we are all now moving into our 50s and in some way a new phase of life with kids going off to college and, you know, and our wheel really changing. So has that changed the way that you think about your personal balance, your time, your work, how much time you want to devote to your work, and all the rest? Monica, maybe we could start with you because I'm sure you all have thoughts about this.
Yeah, it's a great question, Nancy. And I will say two things about that. Of course, coming back from COVID, I think it redefined what was expected in terms of time at home, time at work, travel time. So I think we're kind of finding our new normal as we thought we might. Though I will say at the same time, there is a little bit of I have this sense of kind of running out of time, meaning I'm now, as I enter my 50s, thinking about succession planning and who takes over Quona. So in some ways, it's sort of like sending your kids to college, like you are kind of, because you know you now have like the finite time is defined. So it would really become very, very intentional about like what you want to leave, what you want to institutionalize, what role you want to play. And maybe I'll say something else on the personal side about this phase of entering the 50s. My kids are in high school and, you know, a couple of years away from college. And maybe that kind of also realization, you know, one, and the beauty of COVID, which gave us this kind of blessed time to be very close to them and watch much more closely than we ever did before, kind of even the day-to-day, and appreciating that and making time for that. But also they're in a phase where they're kind of much rather hang out with their friends than their mom. I mean, we still have a relationship, but it's definitely have some competition. And so actually I've started gardening now. I think I have this like energy to channel, this nurturing energy. So, or maybe it's just to kind of be present. And I think it's a great tool for me to really, really be present. But that's what I would share on my journey.
Yeah, Wendy, the parenting demands are still there, but they're changing rapidly, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, I have a son in college and two girls who are going into their last year in high school, so it's all very real to me. That, this time is precious, first of all, that we have with our children still. So wanting to make sure to carve out time with them, and do things differently because now they're really much more adults. So, one of the things we talked about with when it was COVID was how are we going to travel differently since we all travel a lot for our work. And one of the things I've been able to do, and it's helped just because they're older, is when I go on an interesting work trip to an interesting place like Colombia or Kenya or Paris, I've taken my kids with me and they've had their own learning experiences through that, right? To be able to either, see what I'm doing and participate in what I'm doing, or see other things that are really important for their own development and education. And it's also just been amazing times for us to bond and connect over things that are special for just the two of us. So that's been a really amazing way to think about, like, as we phase out with kids, we always will have those times to vacation with them or to spend with them, and really like intense, beautiful time together on that. At the same time, I also just, my mother just passed away, and she was an amazing woman. She was an entrepreneur and an activist, and was involved in so many things. And one of the things that was my big takeaway from that is really she blossomed in her third act. For her, all of the accomplishments that she had of, creating a lot of environmental programs and women's, activism for women and working on programs abroad in Africa, they all happened after we left for college. And, that was when she had the time. And to me, a takeaway from that experience was the importance of community. So, I think we think about like, oh, the kids are leaving, it's empty nest, but really what she was able to do was work on so many different things that create community around her. And I think that's just, really essential for longevity, for happiness, for health, and just maintaining that quality of life and feeling of purpose as we get older. So for me, I'm not retiring yet, but I am starting to think about how do you start building those activities, those, things that will carry you into the next phase when you do have more time for that kind of thing. So I think it's very different from what we were talking about when we were writing the book, where we're just in the trenches of, kids and husbands and families. And now it's really a much more strategic process of thinking, okay, what's the next 30 years going to look like?
Lisa, how do you think about that empty nest period, because it is rapidly approaching?
It is rapidly approaching, and whenever I see a movie where the kid goes off to college, I just cry and cry. So you can be sure that there's some of that in the future. But one thing that Wendy was just talking about in terms of the third act is also something that's really inspired me in my family. My mom, her mom, and my dad all have had these incredible third acts. My mom and my dad are in that third act at the moment, I guess getting towards the end of that one. But I've seen them all, either their careers take off at that time. That's the case for my mom and my grandmother. Or in the case of my dad, he retired and has been doing an incredible amount of, let's say, community action. He's joined multiple boards, very involved in all kinds of things in Houston. And it's really been a great reflection for me to see that, that in that third act, there's so many more chapters to write. And this is something that's really inspired me recently in my own journey. And I've actually in the process of launching an accelerator for women in their, let's call it the third act, as Wendy said, with another friend from Thrive DC, and to really accelerate that, the joy and the community and the path as new and exciting things can open up in that third act. And so that's one of my reflections on this chapter. Another thing that I wanted to share, you asked me why we moved to Spain, and it's also related to the the send off to college situation. So we really moved to Spain because of our daughter. We have a teenager, she's 16 now, and we moved here because my husband's from Spain and she's grown up bilingual, but we wanted to make sure that she had a chance to grow up just as comfortable in Spain as she is and was in the United States. And so we saw that this was our last opportunity for her to really have a couple of years here in high school. And it's been really wonderful to experience a new country through her eyes and see that whole adventure. And it's made it a much richer adventure for the three of us, plus our dog. He's the only one who isn't quite so happy with all of these changes. He was, born in like a rural area, and he's not quite convinced that the city is the best place for him. But anyhow.
Well, we all want him to thrive as well. You've talked a little bit about a portfolio approach to your career. What do you mean by that?
So after I left Accenture 2 years ago, after a 25-year career, like in the same organization, I've seen that there's a whole new way of work-life balance, let's say. And at this time, I have a whole portfolio of activities, jobs, community action that I'm part of, not just working in one company. So I've started a new business with my husband. It's a small consulting firm and think tank, and we offer innovation as a service. I've also started to teach at a local university here in strategy and sustainability. I'm also starting to write the second edition of the Rebalance to Thrive book with two women from Thrive Madrid. And there's a number of other things on, that are starting to bubble up. And it's been really fun to embrace this kind of multiple sources of revenue and action.
You touched on it, Monica, the fact that when you all were writing this book, it was during the pandemic. We were experiencing work one way. We had ideas about what work was going to look like when we emerged. And some of that turned out to be the case and some didn't. So, now that we are out of the pandemic, what's changed for the better? What's changed for the worst? And how have you adjusted, all of you, to the new reality of work?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I pick up a couple of threads that both Wendy and Lisa shared. So Wendy talked about travel, and for a while I felt it was sort of like this pent-up demand. When things opened back up, it was sort of actually insane how much people expected and demanded, I think longed for that in-person connection. And so because of the nature of the work we do, we invest in early stage companies. There is a real need and an importance of being face-to-face. We say shoulder to shoulder with our entrepreneurs. So I was on the plane a lot, contrary to what I said earlier about really actually also at the same time valuing even the small things with my kids, having lunch with them or seeing a play or watching a sporting event. So I felt actually really pulled in a difficult way right after COVID. I think things have normalized a bit. And to me, what I see is this, and I think Lisa's example of the portfolio approach is a great example of it, this real generative phase where people are just bringing their creativity, their new ideas, and kind of saying there's no sacred cows anymore. We really have the agency and the need to redefine. I would say, if anything, given what's happening in the world, I mean, there's some pretty radical elements, whether you look at politically or even judiciously what's happening and overturning things that have been, we thought, were very kind of well accepted and values and ways of working, again, politically, economically, legally, that I would say personally is very unsettling. And so to me, maybe the beauty of the book and even the process of Thrive and is that it continues, that generative, innovative process of thinking about, okay, this is a problem, this is a challenge, this is out of balance. How do I chart a path, to really help stabilize that's very value centric, that I can do so in integrity and move forward. So the themes of the book, and another thing I would say that has been, again, really a touchstone for me, is that the book is very practical. If you read the pages and the chapters, there's idea after strategy. And again, anyone who sat with a group of women over brunch will not be surprised to hear this. Like, it's can do, practical, kind-hearted, and real. And that,
Right. And
yeah,
I think that's what we're all hungering for. I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
No, please. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
Wendy, how about for you? Has travel returned to pre-COVID levels for you? And do you have more control now, do you feel, than you did before about when you travel?
I travel a lot. So like Monica, it didn't slow down. It actually sped up after the pandemic, just catch up travel, and then just big networks. I run a program for women entrepreneurs. We're working in 90 countries now. We have, donors in 14 countries. We work with 7 multilateral development banks. So there's just a lot of traveling and events that, I need to go to, and meetings to see the entrepreneurs and to see our partner organizations. So it's important, but what I've tried to do is be more mindful about taking time when I'm traveling to really enjoy something about the country. So I found with little kids, it was very hard to just stop and take a breath and say, I'm going to take an afternoon, or I'm going to take a day out of the weekend, or maybe the weekend, and really just be there, be present, experience the country in a way other than in meeting rooms. And so I've really tried to do that. It hasn't always worked. I mean, I've definitely had some crazy trips that I don't want to repeat, but I'm just trying to be more mindful of that. And I think also that'll get easier again as we become empty nesters and there's less to come home to. So that's been important. But I think also just when I'm home, it's very different. So I feel like after the pandemic, just weekends and evenings are different. Like it's not just a rush go, like if you're not going out on the weekend, you need to be doing something else, or it just feels more okay just to be home with the family, just doing family stuff. Like I feel like what seemed to be a more rushed environment before is a little bit more relaxed now. Maybe it's because the ages the kids are, but I feel like it's that way for a lot of friends who, came out of the pandemic and just said, we don't need to be rushing around or over planning every free moment that we have. So I feel like that's been a big change. And then also I feel like there's a lot more, like my conversations with people, and this gets back almost to the first question about what are people saying about the book. Also in my work, working with entrepreneurs, I just see a lot more focus on purpose and really like trying to weigh, is what I'm doing important enough to be spending all this time on it, right? And because we have a lot more flexibility with work schedules and travel, things like that, I think people are able to be a little bit more forgiving of themselves, or, really start to weight things differently. So we see so many entrepreneurs now, kind of quitting their old jobs or retooling themselves to really do something that's climate related, for example, or working on agricultural food systems, or, working on their communities. So it's, people are really taking that risk, taking that leap, because they see the important, maybe it's also what Monica said about just the political environment and the world seeming, to be on fire sometimes. And women are really investing in that and stepping into that, that breach to be the people to make the change. So I feel that in my own life, like more purpose driven. And I see that with the people I work with and the people that we're funding.
Right. It's almost like COVID gave everyone a window into everyone else's life a little bit, and what they were dealing with logistically on a day-to-day basis. You're all obviously leaders in your respective field. So I think even without this book, you'd be getting questions from younger women all the time about how you balance, how you thrive, particularly in the wake of this book. What kinds of questions are you getting from those younger women? What is most on their minds, and what has surprised you about what they're concerned most about compared to maybe what you were worried about when you were their age?
I can take that. So I just conducted a Rebalance to Thrive workshop with 8 women in Madrid, and a couple of them were younger, like having their first baby. One was about to give birth, or just gave birth now a couple weeks ago. And so in that sense, I've been exposed to some younger women asking questions. And one big topic was about planning, like advanced planning. And how far ahead to be planning, essentially. One thing that I've noticed in my own life is that I used to make 10-year plans kind of on the decade. Like we lived in San Francisco from 2000 to 2010, and then we lived in DC from 2010 to 2020. And I had always imagined, that next decade being in Spain. And then with COVID in 2020, that whole ability to make those kinds of long range plans essentially went out the window. And now we're kind of flying without such a long range plan. And I found that with younger women who I'm talking with here in Madrid, that notion of like much shorter plans, like let's plan for this year, let's plan for this, 6 months, is much more comfortable. And another thing that I've noticed from the workshop was doing this exercise called the journey line, where you look at your life and you kind of draw the line of your life. And when you do that in a group of women, you notice immediately that everybody's life has an up and down cycle. Some go way up, some go up and flat. It's something that brings all of us together. And so realizing that we all have lives are a roller coaster for all of us at different times, and realizing that what's unique to us is how we find that strength. What's the source of our strength to move into an upcycle? And that's something that's really special. And so my advice to young women is to look back on your life and realize where your strength comes from. Because at any age, everyone's gone through something or other. And there's something very unique to yourself that gives you that strength to, to pick yourself up again. Something that Monica said right at the beginning, and to have that resilience. So everybody's own resilience can motivate them going forward.
But I like that. Find your own strength. Wendy, what kinds of questions are you getting from younger women who are just starting out on that roller coaster?
Yeah, I've actually been surprised that that's very similar to the kinds of questions that I had. I mean, I do think that younger women have less of a sense of permanence in their job searches, right? There's a sense that there's going to be a lot more volatility in their careers because of just the world that we're in, and things like AI and, just generally the speed of the economy. But I think women are really asking themselves, I think many women want to do something that's purposeful. They want to have their kids, and it's just hard to figure out how to really excel in your job. And also think about, should I have 1 kid? Should I have 2 kids? Should I have 3 kids? And they're just looking for tips, of how to make that all work. And I think this idea of, the portfolio or the rebalance and the, just don't worry so much about the long run. Just, go with it, ride the wave as much as you can. And if you have to step back, you end up in a slow period, that's awesome. You shouldn't fear that. And if it gets too fast and things are too crazy, you might ride that wave for a little while, or you could step off of it. So I think, they're looking at the same things we were looking at. And I think, what they need, and this was also kind of a casualty of COVID, is community, people to talk to. How do I find my friends, my wolf pack, and what does that look like? So I think they're longing for the same thing, but some of that broke down during COVID for sure, especially now that they're not going into the office. I was surprised. I was dying to get back into the office, but many of the younger generation were not. And so, they haven't seemed to be too eager also to get back into the in-person environment where so many of our networks were built, so much of our community came from. So they come at it with definitely different perspectives, but they're looking for the same things.
That's so interesting. Has that been your experience as well, Monica?
Yeah, for sure. I'll just echo a couple of things and underscore. So the purpose piece, I definitely think most of the younger generation is looking, as we all are, to build something bigger than themselves and really leave a legacy. And that's palpable and certainly a thematic when people ask me for advice. The second that is more surprising to me, and Wendy touched on it, is I feel like the women in their 20s and 30s are just rock stars. I feel they're so much better prepared and more experienced and just exposed to more than I was when I was that age. And yet they have the doubt is as strong. That inner critic is so loud in their voice. And I've always been, it surprises me given how, again, they seem so much more experienced and prepared and informed than I was in many ways. So that advice around really own your greatness, find your voice, know you have agency. They do. And I think it's just hearing it from each other, hearing it and repeating it with no inflection in our voice is so important. And the other thing I'll just say, and maybe it's my own realization, but I sort of think that maybe the earlier generations have a sense of this, and they're even starting to ask me advice about this, is on the marriage and partnership piece. I think, one of the things that I mentioned when we were talking about the empty nesters is that I realize, and often we joked about this at the wheel, we would fill in our wheel about getting exercise and enough sleep and, kind of leaning into work and promoting ourselves, or, spending time with our kids, and always on the bottom, or often on the bottom, were our spouses. Like, oh yeah, that too. Like, oh yeah, we should do a date night. And I don't want to speak for everyone, but certainly, I remember many a time saying, "Ooh, that bar is not as filled as it should be." And, not only, in that third act, appreciating our spouse and actually building that relationship. And maybe I'll quote Esther Perel says, "We'll all be married multiple times, some of us to the same person." And so I'm looking forward to my third marriage to the same person as I enter that third act.
That's an important reminder, and something for everyone to keep in mind as we move into that third act. This has been a really great reunion, ladies. And congratulations again on a really remarkable achievement then 2 years ago, and everything that you have done since. It was wonderful to catch up. And I can't wait to see what you do next in this third act. Lisa, Wendy, Monica,
Thank
it was
you.
great to see you. Great to chat.
Thanks
you,
so much,
Nancy.
Nancy.
Thank
It's
you,
great talking
Wendy.
to you.
Thank you, Monica.
Right back at you.
Bye.